once again, Happy New Year. We are rocking on in. January is underway, and we're delighted that you're here to be part of the conversation. Enjoyed our conversation yesterday. Yesterday, yes. Time is just moving so quickly. It's just amazing. And ready to move forward on the next level with putting together these tools, this understanding of these first century Aramaic tools and how to put them to work in your life. So we're delighted that you're here to be part of the conversation. And Miss Jeanie, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
A hand just went up. I believe it's Miss Susan, 610.
Awesome.
You're on the air.
Let's go for it.
Hi, guys. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Thank you. We are. It's underway.
Good. Good. I have a question and a comment. The question is, when we do our work, well, I should just tell you what's going on. I'm okay today, but I've had a couple of hard days, anxiety, tremendous fatigue, and a rash on my body, and it's not shingles. It's sort of my upper body, back and front. I showed it to my daughter-in-law, who's a doctor, and he said, gosh, I don't know what those are. And they're very itchy, and I looked up Louise Hay, and I forget all of what she said, but something about anger and good grief. And I'm thinking, okay. So I've been doing some worksheets, and they seem to have been going kind of nowhere, except that the effect is somehow just paying attention is like a prayer, or it helps anyway. And that's sort of a testimonial. It's something I'm discovering is I don't have to know what I'm doing in the worksheet. And it can be pretty far away from probably the mark, the place where it should go. But after 2 or 3 yesterday morning, a lot lifted. The itch didn't lift, though. I wondered if you as a nutritionist person, Michael, might have a comment on that or an idea.
Well, the first place I would go with that kind of a thing going on, and how much of your structure is it covering?
From the waist up, back and front, back of the neck, down the back, chest, shoulders, even on my arms. And it's like last night I took a brush and I was brushing my skin, which I've read is good for circulation and stuff, and I don't do it nearly enough. But everywhere I touched, I wanted to really scratch, even though there were no marks or anything, no sign of bug bites. But it's like my whole body is itching. So I'm itchy to do something, but I don't know what it is.
Right. Well, the first thing I do with that sort of a set of symptoms is I would look into and begin a colon cleanse. The skin is the largest illuminative organ in the body. And at least according to some theories in naturopathic medicine, the skin has a direct relationship with different parts of the colon. And if a part of the colon is blocked, is not handling its eliminative functions properly, then the tendency will be to create some kind of a skin challenge, because the skin will take over from the colon. So with that kind of a generalized thing, I'd start a colon cleanse. You can go on Amazon, and there's some simple powders you can take and mix, or capsules, that sort of thing. There are a number of them. And Jeanie, do you remember the one we used last time we did a cleanse?
I'm looking it up right now.
So that would be my starting point. And then, of course,
even though
overall,
my functions seem to be fine, I mean, I haven't noticed any problem with digestion or anything.
Right. No, that would just be a general, there are reflexes to every part of the colon from the skin, at least according to the theory that some hold. And, that would be without any other, nothing else specific comes to mind. So that would be a shot in the dark to go, okay, so I'm going to do a general colon cleanse and see if that changes what's happening.
You know what's really weird, Michael, is my younger sister complained about this about a year ago, and it's never gone away with her. We have the same thing. And I called her and I said, did you ever, she doesn't mention it anymore. She said, no, I still have it. I've gotten used to it. I scratch all the time. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. So I said, if I find something, and she told me all about these oatmeal soaps and this and that. And, I'm happy to try those things. But I imagine, just as you say, it's probably something, Christmas came and went, and I went off. I had ice cream every day for about 5 days and ate some chocolates and some cookies. I was bad, and I thought that's what it was. But
you're being punished for your sins.
I know. And a friend came over, and I don't usually drink anything, but she loves a glass of wine, so I got a bottle of wine, and I had wine every day with her for 3 days. And then my son turned 50, and we had wine again. And I thought, red wine, it's known to produce, hives or inspire allergies to flare up. So I thought, okay, it was that. But I've been good starting right after Christmas, and it's still going on. So I like this idea of a cleanse. I have a standard enema here, but that's not what you're talking about really, right?
No, an enema won't touch, if especially with that larger body response. An enema won't touch the whole colon, the parts of the colon that could be involved. If that's where the challenge lies, then a general colon cleanse. There's a book out there. You might find it interesting to read if you're looking for something to read. You've probably heard me talk about it before on the show. It's called Tissue Cleansing Through Bowel Management by a physician named Bernard Jensen.
Yeah,
and he actually lays out several different cleanses, from a really simple, easy one to a deep level one that actually is just about a full-time job for a week. I used to guide people through that process, and it's a pretty intense cleansing process. Literally, I have seen come out of people's colons pieces of stringy substance, like you would see, a shred of a black rubber tire on the side of the road, from a car.
Oh, okay.
With pieces like that, and the record, as far as I understand, is people clearing out pieces of that sort of material from the colons that are 8, 9, and 10 feet long.
Oh my God. It's like popping pimples or knuckle cracking. Very satisfying.
Okay.
Michael, I just sent you a picture. I'm not sure if that's the one you're talking about. We did a yerba prima.
That's it, yerba prima, yeah.
It had like a prebiotic and a probiotic, and it's just basically taking capsules for so many days. So it was really easy, and you can get it on VitaCost, probably Swanson's or several places. But I'll put a link in the chat room too.
Thank you so much. All-Purpose Jeanie doing it again, and congratulations on fussing with that website. I know what it's like. I have a website, nothing as big as yours, but finding links that don't work, it's very frustrating. You put it in there and they can't get it, and they don't tell you. Oh, yeah.
I know. And then it became like a rabbit trail, because I would click one link and it'd be like, okay, I need to see if I can find that. And so I'd do a Google search to see if I could find it on somebody else's website. And and then I'd end up finding something else, and it was just like one thing after another.
Wow. Well, it's amazing that you know how to do all that. It's terrific. When you went on eHarmony, you had no idea.
No, I didn't.
And Michael didn't either. What he was getting in this nice deal. All right. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, why don't you go ahead with your stuff and everything? You probably have a talk planned and everything, and so on.
Well, we will go for it. And Jeanie, I didn't get a link from you. I just got a picture.
Right. I went downstairs and took a picture of a bottle on the shelf. So I'll pull the link though and put it in the notes for today. But I didn't know if that was the one you were talking about.
Well, yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a simple, easy to do one, and pretty effective.
A question about that. I can picture me running to the bathroom in the middle of a Pilates class or something. I mean, I do have to.
No, it doesn't do that.
It doesn't do that? Okay. Sorry, folks.
And then it will tend to pick up. It will tend to accelerate elimination, but it's not a. It doesn't put you into an emergency condition.
Okay, thank you.
And then after I finished it, I think it lasted like 2 weeks, but it was a matter of like taking 2 capsules in the morning, 2 capsules in the evening, or something like that. I mean, it wasn't any big deal. And when I finished it, then I went and had a colonic just to totally clean everything out.
Wow. That's very impressive. Maybe even brave.
Courageous.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read that book, Dr. Jensen's book, he has pictures of what comes out of people's colons, and I mean, he talks about the record of anyone in surgery that's ever been found with the kind of problem that he's talking about cleaning up through the different cleanses, but the record is a colon that weighed 65 pounds and was 11 inches in diameter, if you can imagine. And
that
people
person
who eat
must have been in tough shape.
Yeah, if you eat the SAD diet, standard American diet. In fact, I was back in the days when I used to work in that arena a lot. You mentioned one of the things that you sinned with.
Yeah.
And that's ice cream, and we used to call that cow pus. Because each state has its own regulation on how much cow pus is allowed in a pint of ice cream, that sort of thing.
Michael, when I eat ice cream, I think of that. Thank you very much. But I don't eat ice cream very often. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Cool. Well, anything else on your mind for today?
Well, sure, but see if Jeanie's got somebody in the line there, in the lineup. Nothing urgent. Just sort of reports.
Well, I'm sure she'd be back with us if there were, so go for it.
Go for it.
Oh, okay. Report on Luke. He made it through New Year's. He spent time with his mother.
All right.
And he said to his mother, as if this thought was brand new to him, and I know I've said it to him before because you have said it to me, and that people who imbibe, use drugs or alcohol to the point of blackout the way he was doing every day, it's because of trauma, or that's one possibility. And he finally acknowledged that he, much as he adored his father, that he had had a hard time, and he's beginning to talk about that. And he's also, I told him your phrase, it's not Dr. Feelgood, because he's feeling a lot of sadness, depression, anxiety. I said, Lukey, you're finally letting yourself feel what you were squashing before, so stay with it. It'll pass, and it's wonderful. And he's going back to school, to a new school. I guess I told you, a new apartment. Tim and I are helping with that, and he's excited about having his own place. He's 24 years old, so this addiction thing has slowed him down by 2 or 3 years. But he has time. So anyway, that's one report. And then I can report on our Michael. Things are going very well with him. He's doing the sweetest things. We've decided, as per that wonderful, I think I told you, that wonderful actor in England who said, Ian McClellan, he talked about when he returned to London and got in a taxi, the taxi man said, "Where to, love?" And he was so touched
Right.
he cried. So, and I say, "Hello, love," when we see each other. And Michael, you say you don't love anybody, and I'm not going to argue with you, but it's like that space of love. It just puts us in the space. It just puts us in the space. And when we go to church, he vacuums the house, and he didn't even tell us he was doing that. I just looked at the rug, and I thought, this rug ought to need being vacuumed. It's been a week, and it doesn't need it. And I noticed that the vacuum cleaner was put away a different way with the cord neatly coiled, and I just throw it all in there.
That's awesome.
And I know. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I've been doing that when you're not home." And Tim likes him to stay forever because he fills the bird feeders, as I've told you, and that's a big chore, and Tim always was doing it, and now Michael has taken it over. So, but Michael, I don't expect anything. That is a tremendous relief to just let him be. And he's just being. He spends all day playing the guitar or earphones on and watching a little tiny computer television he has downstairs or whatever it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know what he's doing, but there's something quite wonderful about the whole thing. And he's teaching us something about letting things
awesome.
be. Yeah, it reminds me of Ben, that guy who came on, that teacher. He just said, just love him, just love him. Boy, was he on at the perfect time.
He was, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He's just the most amazing guy here in Bristol.
Yeah.
He just touches a lot of people.
Right. Oh, and then I have one more question, and then I really will let you go. I've been looking at the Burpee magazine because Michael and I are going to do our garden, and with his help, I really think we can make a garden this year again. I gave it up last year. It was just too much. But
Right.
I was looking at very few seeds are organic. Does it matter if you get organic seeds? What does it mean to have an organic seed? Or if you just have it in good soil, is that enough?
Well, somebody who's really the perfectionist is going to want to acquire organic seeds, and theoretically there's a difference. But I think that if you're using a decent seed supplier, you're okay with whatever you do there. Keep the soil decent. Where we've actually been getting prices on having some soil delivered here to the or some compost and soil for doing a new native species garden for butterflies and moths and caterpillars and that sort of thing. So that's something we've been working on the last day or two.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we do that too. We have a whole big place where it's just grown up and the critters go there. So that's good. Yeah, I'm glad you're doing that. So thank you for answering the questions. Thanks for all the advice. And I'll just listen from now.
Well, we appreciate you, and I'm so glad that Luke is doing so well. That's pretty awesome that he's moving forward in his process, and at 24 to be waking up.
Yeah.
There are several people that I've worked with over the years who've done the AA program, and 2 or 3 of them I've talked to in just the last few days, and I'm talking about guys who are more like in their 70s who are just so appreciative of the fact that there came a point where they dropped alcohol and woke up. So, and they were not so lucky as to be doing it at 24. So that's pretty awesome. They had the support to wake up from that.
I'll tell that to Luke. He'll find that a comfort. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, young lady, we appreciate you, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks.
All right. Well, Miss Jeanie?
I'm going to check and see. I believe that he spoke with Dr. Tim, but Michael, who was at Heartland, his hand's up, but I think it was left over from Dr. Tim. Michael, did you have another comment?
Hey there, young man. Are you with us? Hello, Michael Teddy. Oh, maybe he's away from his phone right now and it is a leftover hand up kind of deal.
All righty. Nobody else has a hand up. Go for it.
Cool. Well, I was going to touch into, we had some conversation the other day about the kinds of thought disorders that cause certain symptoms, tend to go along with certain symptoms, and how they impact the structure and what kind of things most people have to look at. And as Susan reminded us, it's not Dr. Feelgood to go back and look at a thought disorder that causes pain, whether that pain's physiological or emotional, mental. It's not Dr. Feelgood to go back and look at and deal with those things. And there is a chart, and maybe you could put a link to it in the notes, that's called the physiological effects of emotional suppression. I thought I'd just kind of take a quick run through that. This is something that we present in the workshop, Naturopathic Keys to Health. And you know, if you hold a newborn child and you tap into the essence of the newborn, it gets really clear really quickly that the child is in fact the actual presence of love, and that when we live as we're designed to live, that's what the experience is going to be. And when one lives in that state, it's been entitled enthusiasm. In theos being the creator, enthusiasm is the root of that. And the kind of thinking that goes along with living in enthusiasm is, you know, just I love life, I'm excited, connected. And offering is that it is our birthright to live in that space, connected to the empowerment that comes from that presence of love, the genius and the aliveness that comes from that space. So when a disintegrated form of energy, and that's the basic structure of thought disorders. You know, when you think of this body-mind unit as an integrated energy system, there are energies that build it up, there are energies that tear it down. So a disintegrated quality of energy is going to tend to create symptoms. And when that happens, when we dissociate from those energetic patterns, they tend to lock into different parts of the structure in a general way, not saying, you know, X, Y, Z, this is exact and specific, but in a general way, you can get a sense from symptoms, usually, what kind of thoughts are being held in the structure, what kind of thought disorders are going on. So if enthusiasm is shut down, and it's usually shut down, the first thought disorder that most people confront from their power person is, now as I've said this many times, is that idea that you're broken, there's something wrong with you, so that the internalized thought is, you know, what's wrong with me? It comes along with self-blame, usually accompanied by guilt and shame, and degrading thoughts about self. And you watch most people when they're in some sort of trauma, and if you get close to their thinking about themselves, that's what they'll touch into. And the master gland of the whole structure is called the pineal. It's the only light-sensitive gland. It's actually in the brain. And when one buys into that I'm broken, you know, what's wrong with me type of thought disorder, it tends to lock into and create an interference pattern, a disintegration in the pineal gland, and the pineal gland tends to calcify. So that's kind of a starting point for most people in terms of beginning to age, beginning to lose the full experience of the vitality that we're designed to live in. Now, if one is in enthusiasm and they lose that connectedness, it tends to be painful, it tends to hurt. So then the thoughts that go along, I don't know if anybody else remembers as a kid being told things, but I can sure remember it, being told things like, if you don't stop that crying, I'll give you something to cry for. And it's like, excuse me, I'm crying. I have a reason to cry. But, of course, adults tend to, and I think because of their own dissociated pain, don't like to have their child feel the pain that they haven't dealt with. These pain patterns tend to be generational, so if the child goes into, experiences that pain, oftentimes the adult wants to shut it down, so becomes abusive in order to shut it down. And so the thought disorder, the thought that goes on in the mind tends to be, this hurts, and I'm not even allowed to feel part of that experience when the adult, does something like, if you don't stop that crying, I'll give you something to cry for, is humiliation. And that tends to affect, and this chart is something, I've expanded it somewhat, but it comes out of the naturopathic tradition of medicine for people to, to begin to look at what's going on within their structures and what they're doing with their mind energy. And we go to the opening words in the book of John, and it doesn't say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. It says, in the beginning was the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. When we buy into destructive or disintegrative mind energy, that mind energy, literally, what the cell biologists are showing us is an exact verification of what those opening words in the book of John say. Because what happens is that thought becomes a neuropeptide. If you look at the work of Bruce Lipton as a cell biologist, he'll show that a thought becomes a neuropeptide, becomes an actual molecule within the structure, and that molecule circulates around the structure until it finds a cell with a receptor site, lands on the receptor site, and if you're looking from inside the cell, that neuropeptide landing on the receptor site in the cell inserts itself, and what we would see coming into the cell would be what we call chemistry. And so the result is that it creates an interference pattern, and in this case, the humiliation that this hurts, I'm not allowed to feel, tends to shut down and impact the pituitary gland. By this time, the average child is heading into what's called the terrible twos, and it's considered, I think, pretty much standard in rearing children and pretty much a part of the process. I feel really blessed in that, having this awareness, we've been very careful with Aria in terms of the kinds of mind energy that we give her, the kinds of thoughts that we engage in with her, whether we speak those thoughts or not, to keep them clean, to keep them updated, and to recognize, for me personally, I've really learned in my job as her grandfather, and of course it was the same job I had as a father, and I wish I'd understood it back when my kids were small, 4 decades ago, the way that I understand it now. I certainly had some idea of it, but not on the level that I do now. But we've been really careful as to what kind of thinking she does. The thoughts come out of her mouth that are of destructive or disintegrative nature. We have a conversation about it. And we're careful to utilize words that reflect, the highest levels of mind energy that we can. And there were no terrible twos at all with that girl. I mean, she's 4 now, and aside from if she, would actually fall and hurt herself, I would say that in 4 years, taking care of her, generally speaking, 2 to 3 days a week, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little bit less, that I've heard her cry maybe a total of 2 or 3 hours total over 4 years. And I think one of the reasons for that is that being careful of the mind energy that we express when she's around us. When one isn't allowed to feel their pain, wasn't allowed to express their pain, isn't allowed to cry. Like, for instance, one day I remember we were having breakfast downstairs, and Ari was in kind of a little bit of a mood and was going to go on and on with the disturbing energy. And we were sitting having breakfast, and I said, "Sweetie, if you need to cry, that's okay, but Nini and I are having breakfast, and we'd like to have a quiet space. So here, why don't you go on upstairs, and you've got your play area, and just go ahead, and you can hang out and do whatever you want to do. And if you want to cry, that's okay." And she wasn't very cooperative about doing that, so I picked her up gently, gave her a hug, carried her upstairs, said, "You can just hang out up here for a while." She was probably, maybe a little better than a year ago, Jeanie. And about 25 minutes later, she came quietly down the stairs, looking around the corner to see what was going on. It's like, "Hey, what's happening?" So, "Well, I got my room cleaned up," and she had decided, instead of continuing to cry, that she'd pick all the things up in her room and rearrange things, and and the rest of the day was just awesome. And so I think being careful of what we do if kids are in pain and expressing those feelings, being aware and conscious of holding that space. But when one isn't allowed to feel what's real for them, then there tends to be a movement toward antagonism. And the kind of thinking that goes along with that, we've seen a small child that will lash out, and that's the thought disorder that goes with it is usually something like vengeance. I'm going to get you, and it's accompanied by a threat. And if antagonism, somebody screams and shuts the antagonism down, "Don't you dare do that," rather than creating a space to process and, discipline. If we look at the word discipline, it comes from the word disciple. It does not mean, as the culture teaches, properly beat up. The word discipline means properly taught. And so we'll have a conversation about those sorts of things using the kind of language and energy that tends to lift up rather than drag down. But if antagonism is met with the unresolved antagonism of the adult, if the child goes in that antagonistic state, then it tends to move from just, "I'll get you," to overt hostility, and it becomes an outright, "I will hurt you." And the child wants to strike out. And of course, how many times do we see adults verbally, physically doing exactly the same thing? Those energies not creating the space to process, and remember, in this work we define processing as the ability to hold love conscious, active, and present when something that's less than love comes up. If the environment that a child lives in contains this antagonism and overt hostility, then anger tends to be the next level that just kind of takes over. And the thoughts that go along with anger are oftentimes, for the child, "I must hide my rage or they'll kill me, they'll destroy me, they'll hurt me." And when a pain is not resolvable for the child or the adult, then the tendency is to go into some sort of self-medication. And the medication here, literally, the drug, is anger. So someone who's really in anger a lot is really no different than the person who picks up a fifth of scotch. It's a way to anesthetize against pain. And this tends to affect the thyroid. It's not so long ago, half a century or so ago, maybe a little more, that if, let's say, for some sort of medical reason, the chest of a child was opened and they discovered a normal thyroid gland, that they would actually do a thymectomy and remove it because they thought it was enlarged and overgrown. Because in the medical world, whenever they had to crack somebody's chest, the thyroid gland kind of looked about the size of a walnut. And it wasn't known that that was an abnormally small thyroid. It was thought that was normal because that's what everybody had, and that one intense period of anger can shrink the thyroid gland by 50% in a 24-hour period. And so they would, do lung surgery or something like that in a child, and they'd find this huge thymus gland and cut it out. And the anger has become so normal that it impacts the structure of the thyroid gland and causes its shrinkage. Of course, then the adult, with the antagonism, the overt hostility, the anger, oftentimes the response from the adult is retribution. And with retribution and the thought disorders fed to the child then goes into covert hostility. Instead of overt, I'm going to hurt you, it becomes covert, and the thought is more like, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to knock over your favorite, beautiful, expensive crystal vase, Mom. And this is a stage where the child learns deceit. And, if you download this chart, you can just print it off of the website. If you download it, you can see that on the right-hand side of the chart, mark that this is called the aging or the dis-ease process. And it's a quality of energy that tends to be imposed on the child from without, but also because these patterns of thought are so generational, it tends, I think, to also reflect what's going on within. And so these are all things that, most everybody's going to have to deal with. So if you were physically looking at the chart, and I'm holding in my hand right now, you would see on the right-hand side the arrow points downward toward disease, and this is where disease, death, and suffering come from. And if you look on the left-hand side of the chart, you'll see that the arrow heads upward, and that's where youthing and healing. When you take that load off of the tissue, then the interference pattern's gone, the tissue can begin to function properly again. And something, I just realized that I switched two parts of the chart when I talked about the anger. Anger tends to shut down the thyroid. It's the thymus gland. I did say thymectomy, but I was talking anger, and it's actually fear. We've all heard of the person on the battlefield who was as dead as everybody else that was shot, but there was no injury physically that could be seen. And my offering is that the intense fear, the kind of thought that tends to go along with that is, I'm terrified, I'm going to be hurt again, and that's what affects the thymus. So what I was saying about about anger, really, that applies to the thyroid. It's the thymus that's impacted by fear, and tends to tie into that state of terror. And this is where, with each of these thought disorders, this is where forgiveness comes in, where when one applies the tool of forgiveness, that the constructs that make up these states of mind of upset and disturbance and anger and self-deprecation and such are usually energetic patterns that were established as early in life as with a power person. Very young children tend to buy into these things. And what forgiveness does is it allows one to collapse the constructs of the mind that leave these intense thought disorders and the intense emotions that go along with them that normally remain hidden. With forgiveness, allows those things to be uncovered, and it allows those things, one to get in touch directly with the experiences behind that. When you hear Yeshua talking about, take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues in life. If you've got an intensely painful perceptual construct or physical structure, that is a reflection of something that's going on. In the ancient Aramaic, that word heart would be the unconscious. Take care of what's unconscious in you. And of course, the average person says, well, how do I get in touch with my unconscious dynamics? That's exactly what forgiveness does. Forgiveness isn't about letting yourself or somebody else off the hook, but forgiveness is the act of collapsing perception, recognizing, this genius mind 2,000 years ago that recognized that the driver for perception is our goals. You'll notice you're never pointing any of these thought disorders at yourself or someone else unless you're just a generally miserable person. But other than that, you're not pointing them at anyone unless you yourself or someone else is frustrating a goal that you hold for them. And what Yeshua understood was, and we can find it as well in writings throughout the world. Another good example of it, Shakespeare. He says, "My words fly up, my thoughts remain below." In other words, I'm unconscious of the thinking that's creating this painful state in my structure, and unless I allow myself to become aware of the thinking behind it, the energetic patterns behind it, there will tend to be a perpetual disease state that just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, drops into deeper states of pain and trauma. What forgiveness does is it collapses the end result of the action of the mind. It collapses the perceptual construct, feigned constructs of the mind, and when those constructs collapse, you drop right into the root energy under the surface. And when you can, and you'll notice in the worksheet, the step before you do the canceling of the goal, you move to a space, the deepest connected space you can, of active love. And when active love is present in you and you allow yourself to access something under the surface, then that which is under the surface will begin to heal. Now, I love the way the Course in Miracles says it. The Course says, you must bring the world you do not want, that is, all your thought disorders, to the world that you do, to the active presence of love. And there's only one place on the planet that I know of that you can find, well, actually 2 places, 3 now, that you can find the key to how to do that. The origin of it, in my awareness and all the study I've done in the last half century, is you have to go back to the 1st century Aramaic language of Yeshua, understand his language in its original context to understand what forgiveness is. And he shows, with forgiveness, how to return your mind to the point where the original energetic assault happened. Now, that doesn't mean that you lie on the couch for 20 years and look for this deep, dark, dirty, terrible thing that happened to you. You walk through life committed to functioning as love, staying in contact with love as deeply as you can, and when your mind is producing something other than that, you collapse its structure. You collapse its construct. And when you collapse its construct, you drop into the underlying thought disorder, and having access to that directly can be an intense and painful experience. But as you become more accustomed to staying connected to love as you do that, you tend to dissolve those energetic patterns. A good example to visualize what that looks like, it's not a very happy event, but it gives a visual. Everybody remembers what the 9/11 towers looked like going down. Here are these huge towers dropping at free fall speed into their own footprint. When you cancel a goal in any given circumstance, when you identify precisely the goal that you're holding for whoever the object of attention is at the moment, whether it's yourself or someone else, the world, the government, whoever, whatever, the mind is saying, oh, that makes me angry, that makes me sad, that makes me afraid. If you look at the goal you're holding and you cancel, in the Aramaic, the word forgive is shabag, it means to cancel. If you cancel that goal, then that construct, literally, just like the 9/11 towers, drops into its own footprint. And you now have access to the unconscious, the heart. That's how you take care of the heart. Because it's out of that, those generationally accumulated energies that the issues in your life show up. And so the thought disorder that the load off of the thymus when you forgive it, the fear-based energy, is I'm terrified that I'm going to be hurt again. If one doesn't have the wherewithal, the support, or the tools to do that, and this is probably now about the age of 3 or 4 for the average child, if they're in a household where there's abuse, then the child goes into what's called propitiation. It's kind of a strange word. It's not one we use very often. But a gentleman named T.S. Eliot created a little ditty that helps remember what propitiation means. He says, "'Tis the highest treason to do the right thing for the wrong reason." And the thought that goes along with propitiation is, I am being forced and I hate it. We watched an interesting film the other night on Amazon called The Tree of Life. It's kind of an unusual film. It's really beautifully filmed, at least parts of it are. And there's not a big explanation. There's not a lot of dialogue. There's some very big name stars in it. But the dialogue is almost nil throughout the whole film. But it shows a family system with a father who dearly cherishes his children, wants to be there for his children, but has so much unresolved trauma that he can't help himself. And there's scene after scene after scene of how his abuse subtly or grossly comes out toward his wife and his children. And it was a good demonstration of how a child moves into this state of propitiation. Churchianity does a lot of this. If Churchianity doesn't know the reason why, if the theologian who's standing up in front of the congregation doesn't know the reason for behaving a certain way and cannot properly discipline, cannot properly teach one why they would do that, then it becomes force. And how often have we heard of or heard the preacher who's doing hellfire and brimstone and threat and fear and literal terrorism to the people in his or her congregation, and they're forcing a state of propitiation. Somebody has an inclination with them, something that wants to explode with, and then they show in this particular film, they show the child who just does some crazy violence, and how especially young boys get together and do this kind of violence. And you can see the direct relationship between there's no room for this child to open and express in a safe space where love is present. And it builds and it builds and it builds. And the one who tries to use force is ignorant of why one would act in a particular way, and so tries to use force and creates this state of propitiation in anybody who does the right thing for the wrong reason. I'm doing this because I'm terrified. In fact, in the church, there's what's called the perfect and the imperfect act of contrition. The perfect act of contrition is, I'm doing this because I love God. The imperfect act is, I'm terrified I'm going to go to hell, so I'm going to do the right thing. But in doing the right thing, the underlying energy that's moving and motivating is disintegrative. Doing the right thing leads to self-destruction, because it's the underlying energy. Again, Yeshua is really clear. Take care of the heart. You've got to look at your own unconscious dynamics. And if your unconscious dynamics are of a disintegrative nature, then doing the right thing is not worth the powder to blow it to hell. And if you engage in forgiveness, you collapse the constructs based in fear. You break through them with the active presence of love, and the whole game starts to change. So the thought disorder that tends to go along, if one's moving down the ladder, is I'm being forced and I hate it. And then one tends to move toward the next level, the next step down the ladder to disease, suffering, aging, and death. and one moves into sympathy. And the destructive aspect of sympathy is kind of like, I have pain just like yours. Let's intensify our pain by suffering together. And negative identification with others is what sympathy becomes. Empathy is a whole different thing. One goes to a funeral, and if they have unresolved pain over death, and there's someone who's, a family member who's just had a family member pass, and they go in now, everybody suffers together, and they intensify the deepened state of disease rather than showing up, having resolved fear, anger, sadness, grief, guilt, loss around death. One steps into a space of active present love, being there to support someone who's suffering a loss. Which do you suppose is more beneficial to the individual who's directly suffered that loss? And so sympathy tends to be the negative identification that happens as one moves downward. So, so we've gone from, I'm excited about life, I love life, to what's wrong with me, degrading thoughts of self, I'm not allowed to feel this hurts, humiliation, to vengeance, and most people contract their lives. Vengeance, I'll get you, then covert or overt hostility, I'll hurt you. Anger, I've got to hide my rage or they'll kill me. And I want to strike out. And covert hostility, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Fear, I'm terrified I'm going to be hurt again. Propitiation, I'm being forced and I hate it. Sympathy, I have pain just like yours, so let's intensify our pain. And then the next, if that energy isn't processed, then the load becomes just overwhelming and people move into grief. And grief is expressed in thoughts as I'm sad, I'm overburdened, I'm hurt. And this is done by my own unconscious imposition of this dissociated pain, and that tends to affect the pancreas and the adrenals. People with and blood sugar. I just saw an article this morning in the explosion, and it doesn't surprise me at all with what's gone on with COVID. They're talking about an explosion of diabetes in the culture. Well, yeah, with the number of deaths and the fear and the grief, the sadness, the loss, diabetes is going to be a natural physiological result because that's going to tend to lay an energetic pattern of dysfunction over the pancreas and the adrenals, and sugar metabolism is going to become the problem. I've watched, and this one in particular, of all of the chart that we're talking about, over the years, I've had the opportunity several times to watch people who are, taking medication for diabetes or have, pretty overt symptoms. One of them, if people don't eat, they are just as nasty and miserable as you can imagine. I remember we had a woman at Heartland once, and she was on the support team for a year, and everybody on the support team was like, oh, get some food and stuff it in her mouth or we're in trouble. And I remember the day that in a still point session, she got in touch with what was at the root of that trauma. And that was that she had been very happily married, and her husband was in an accident, went to the hospital, and got a transfusion with AIDS-tainted blood and died. And literally, the day that memory surfaced and she was able to connect with it and process it and have the support for doing it, that was the last time we saw her miserable or she didn't eat, several times a day. She was able to fast with the rest of the group, and it was no problem at all. Taking the load off of the tissue, and this is how it, again, this is not an exact science I'm speaking of, I'm just talking in generalities. This is what tends to load the tissue up and create dysfunction. And so if one's in that place of, I don't know how to process this sadness, I'm overburdened, I'm hurt, the tendency is to move into thought disorders that, there's nothing I can do. Apathy. There's nothing I can do. Why are they doing this to me again? I'm hopeless, I'm helpless, I'm a victim, I'm alone. That tends to step into the arena of apathy. And that tends to affect the spleen, which tends to interfere with red blood cell production. And each of these thought disorders are energetic patterns that simply don't belong in the human system. And as you begin, if you recognize any of this, as you begin to forgive those energetic dynamics, you literally lift the load off of the tissue, and the tissue simply starts to function again. The final stage, right down to death, is just moves into unconsciousness, and along with the unconsciousness, the kind of thoughts that go with that are, I don't know, I have no idea, and I don't understand. And this is an energetic pattern that tends to load down the reproductive organs and inhibit reproduction. If one moves to that place, it's probably not going to be long before their body just stops functioning. Now, any time, anywhere that one sees themselves in this chart, if they'll engage in the tools, then they'll tend to start to move up the chart, which means they're going to get to face, sometimes these extremely painful childhood memories and or extremely painful generational memories as they allow these things to surface and they work through them. And literally, it's like peeling a load off of the internal tissue structure. And so instead of aging, and we've talked before about the idea that aging has, what we call aging, has nothing to do with time. If one is engaging in these thought disorders on a regular basis, they're aging. They're literally looking like and feeling like they're getting old. If they face these thought disorders, if they begin to allow themselves to become conscious, take care of the heart, take care of the unconscious, and remove those things, forgive those things, then the tendency is for tissue to become more vital, more alive, more functional, and stronger, healthier, and youth instead of age. And in this chart is the whole objective of this work, to recognize if we have been moving down the ladder, how to reverse the process and move back up again into full enthusiasm, in theos. I love life. I'm excited. And I live in my birthright, full of love, full of power, full of genius and aliveness. That's a summation of this whole body of work. And we're down to the last few seconds. I'm just going to say thank you for being with us. I hope your new year is the best one, full of genius and aliveness. That's a summation of this whole body of work. And we're down to the last few seconds. I'm just going to say thank you for being with us. I hope your new year is the best one yet of your eternal life, and that your healing process goes on, and know that we're here 5 days a week to support you. Thanks for joining us.